When the Iranian drones emerged with their massive raids, in fact, a new stage of the war began. When this is no longer a clash on the battlefield, but not artillery duels, but a new threat for which the Ukrainian air defense system is not yet fully prepared. But what will happen if Iran supplies Moscow with ballistic missiles now? And there are many reasons to have suspicions of that. And if North Korea starts supplying weapons, what could it be? Shells, mines, rockets? And why does Washington think that Moscow and Pyongyang have already reached an agreement? I'm Oleksii Matsuka, and in this video we will talk in detail about all these topics. To begin with, let's discuss Iranian kamikaze drones, the use of which against Ukraine both Moscow and Tehran have not formally recognized. For the first time, information about them was confirmed in September when the armed forces of Ukraine shot down such a drone near Kupiansk in Kharkiv region. After that, in fact, an investigation began. Where are these drones produced? How are they delivered to Russia? Where do they attack from? It turned out that there are not so many of them. The Iranians produce about 150 drones of the Shahed 136 type for Moscow per month. They are made in 3 countries at once, in Iran, Syria and Tajikistan. Delivered both by air and by sea, the US intelligence has even traced the flights that delivered the drones to Russia. They are operated by 4 Iranian airlines, one of which belongs to the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps and even uses Russian aircraft Il-76. The sea routes were also traced. The cargo is being transferred from Iran to Astrakhan and Makhachkala. According to the documents, there are spare parts for civil aviation. Another sea route goes from the Syrian port of Tartus to the Crimea. There are even suspicions that Russia may use the grain corridor for this.
It should be noted that the Russians are actively exporting Ukrainian grain by ships to Syria along the route Sevastopol-Tartus. In the return direction, Iranian drones and their components from the Syrian factory may be transported in containers, although there is currently no confirmation of this. From the report of the Ukrainian National Resistance Center.
If this version is confirmed, Russia maneuvers with suspicion of participation and later with a return to the grain deal will look very indicative. CNN has published data that Russia has already used nearly 500 of these drones against Ukraine and expects to receive 200 more in November, as well as a reconnaissance and strike drone, the Mohajer 6. Both Ukraine and the United States confirmed that Iranian military specialists are deployed to Crimea. They conduct both training in handling the Iranian drones and perform maintenance.
The information we have is that the Iranians have put trainers and tech support in Crimea for the drones, but it's the Russians who are doing the piloting. The systems themselves were suffering failures and not performing to the standards that apparently the customers expected. So the Iranians decided to move in some trainers and some technical support to help the Russians use them with better lethality. John Kirby, US National Security Council spokesman.
But the biggest concern is the plans for new deliveries. According to US military intelligence, Moscow has an agreement to purchase Iranian surface-to-surface ballistic missiles. The Washington Post has found out that these are short-range missiles capable of hitting targets at a distance from 300 to 700 kilometers, and Russia plans to place them north on the border with Ukraine. The price of such support is also known. The US believes that in return Iran is asking Russia for help in acquiring additional nuclear materials and aid in the production of nuclear fuel. But it's necessary not only for nuclear reactors, but it can potentially accelerate the creation of nuclear weapons by Iran. But Russia has agreements not only with Tehran, or as it turned out. In September, the Ukrainian military discovered mines with inscriptions in Chinese on abandoned Russian position. The first version: did Beijing also start arms deliveries to the aggressor? In this case, China would instantly fall under US and European sanctions like those introduced against Russia, and this is what China most afraid of. The Chinese economy is out of whack, and they need not make it worse and be sure to keep the exports to the United States. As a result, a different version came out to be more probable. The road of Chinese mines passed through North Korea. Pyongyang could supply the Russian army with Chinese-made shells that it had in stock, but these were only suspicions. And now the US National Security Council has received evidence, since they officially announced that the regime of Kim Jong-un supplies ammunition to Russia through the countries of the Middle East and Africa. Another question is, how big are the North Korean arsenals? On the other hand, North Korea is a militarized country since it has been living in a paramilitary regime for many decades. On the other hand, experts assure that one should not expect any large batches of weapons and ammunition supplied to Russia.
We are not talking about large deliveries. After all, the distance from North Korea to the occupied territory of Ukraine is at least 7,000 to 8,000 kilometers. You cannot deliver mana shells by planes over such distances. It would be too expensive. Therefore, in my opinion, North Korea could carry out some small deliveries of shells for the Russians in the form of perhaps a few echelons. But it is unlikely that such Korean deliveries will become a mass phenomenon, and they will not be able to turn the tide of the war. Petro Chernik, Ukrainian military expert.
How to stop it? It would seem that there is a way out, and it has already been voiced: sanctions. To blacklist everyone who facilitates these contracts, is engaged in legal registration, transportation, make the price so high that they no longer dare to deliver new shipments. But here too, everything is not so simple. Now it's already clear that if the European countries had closed the arms market for Russia back in 2014, after the annexation of Crimea, then maybe this war would not happen at all. But the delay with more decisive restrictions gave the Kremlin a big time lag for arming its army. For example, during an investigation by the Investigate Europe project, it turned out that after the embargo of 2014, the EU states continued to export arms to Russia, and at least until 2020.
This data from all EU 27 official arms exports registers shows that between 2015 and 2020, at least 10 EU member states have exported a total of 346 million euros worth of arms to Russia. France, Germany, Italy, Austria, Bulgaria, Czech Republic, Croatia, Finland, Slovakia and Spain, to different extents, have sold military equipment to Russia. Our investigation shows that the term military equipment is broad and can include missiles, bombs, torpedoes, guns and rockets, land vehicles and ships. Data from the Working Party on Conventional Arms Exports.
It seems that in 2014, the EU Council made a clear decision to ban the sale of weapons to Russia, but the embargo turned out to be full of loopholes. For example, the EU member states have issued more than 1,000 licenses, that is, individual permits for operation with weapons. Such indulgences for themselves permission to carry out this or that arms deal. And the top three leaders among suppliers are France, Germany and Italy. And only with the beginning of a full-scale war in February 2022, the flow of weapons and spare parts stopped. That's why Russia began to look for other suppliers, turned to whomever it could, North Korea and Iran, for whom this is not so much about earnings, but a challenge to the US, an attempt to strengthen their own position in the world.
This is an absolutely new chapter in Iran-Russia relations. It's quite a decisive move from the Iranians to so firmly inject themselves into a war on European soil. Henry Rome, Iran analyst at the Washington Institute for Near East Policy.
That is why both the US and the European Union announced the tightening of exciting and the introduction of new sanctions against Iran. The European Union blacklisted 3 Iranian generals and the Shahid drone manufacturers.
The sanctions aren't symbolic, they are very practical as they prevent people from traveling to the EU and having access to their assets. Furthermore, other countries are also aligning to EU's sanctions regime. The EU has been very clear in its contacts with Iran that it's unacceptable to provide military equipment to Russia. These deliveries allow Russia to continue its murderous campaign against civilians and infrastructure in Ukraine. Peter Stano, EU's lead spokesperson on foreign affairs.
The US also intends to act in a similar way by expanding its sanction blacklists.
We've spoken before about our efforts using all appropriate means to expose, to deter, to confront Iran's provision of these munitions against the Ukrainian people. We will continue to vigorously enforce all US sanctions on both the Russian and Iranian arms trade to make it harder for Iran to sell these weapons to Russia, to help the Ukrainians have what they need to defend against these threats. Ned Price, a spokesperson for the US Department of State.
But it's interesting to figure out one more thing. Are drones capable of changing the situation at the front? What are they for? For destabilization, intimidation, or are they needed mainly for propaganda? After all, this is such an opinion. According to the data shared with us by sources in American diplomatic circles, the US believes that the main task that Russia is pursuing by organizing drone attack is not even the weakening of the energy infrastructure. The main thing, according to Washington, is Russia's attempt to create an atmosphere of fear with the help of blackouts of electricity, water and possibly heat to create a mood inside Ukraine when society will not be ready for war at such a price. This means that the Ukrainian authorities allegedly should abandon the idea of continuing hostilities and enter into negotiations with Moscow. Yes, at the same time, the Kremlin is exhausting both the Ukrainian and Western military budgets. After all, missiles are needed to counter the drones. Yes, in parallel, Moscow is trying to stop the Ukrainian counteroffensive. After all, when the drones started attacking Ukrainians, the priorities of military assistance change. Everyone is now focused on air defense systems and to a lesser extent on weapons that would have break through the front. But the main thing for Moscow, as at least they believe in the United States, is to spread internal instability and force for negotiations. But how can this work? There is a very clear attitude in Kyiv not to agree to negotiations with Russia. Moreover, the Ukrainian authorities also drew a red line for themselves: no negotiations until the whole territory of the country, including Donbass and Crimea, is taken under control. New drone deliveries for Russia worry Ukraine, but there is a nuance.
We know that they have contracts, Iran and Russia, and the numbers have varied from 1,500 to 2,400, but that does not mean that they have received them, because these are contractual obligations of the Iranian side, which is supposed to supply them, and taking into account the fact that the Iranian side supplies drones to other countries for hostilities too, and now the situation is not developing very smoothly for them, we hope that the Iranian side will not be able to fulfill all its obligations in relation to the Russian Federation. Oleksii Reznikov, Minister of Defense of Ukraine.
And this statement by the Ukrainian defense minister may indicate that Iranian drones were considered by Russia as a means necessary only at a certain stage to escalate, to slow down the Ukrainian counteroffensive. But now Ukraine has learned to resist The attacks of the Shaheeds and the first NASAMS complexes have already arrived. And in Germany, the first 100 operators were trained to operate these air defense systems. Therefore, for a new stage of escalation, Russia will probably still consider other types of weapons. These were apparently Iranian surface-to-surface ballistic missiles will appear. A new threat, which in any case will not come as a surprise to either Ukraine or the West. But what approaches will be chosen to neutralize it, military or diplomatic? We will definitely talk about this in our new videos 3 times a week on this channel. I'm Oleksii Matsuka, stay tuned for new releases. Thanks for watching and see you soon.